minerals, I think, that are finally starting to come to fore and need to be looked at in a broad category, not just that specific mineral that's mined, but also what are the ancillary minerals that are extracted at the same time, because there's a concept of co-product and byproduct that is just now starting, to be addressed, that mine tailings have a lot of good value in them, but we've ignored them in the chase for gold, silver, whatever.
Yeah, and certainly, Anne, you've written a lot about rare earths and stuff. I don't want to get too far into it. I'm going to give a few more moments for people to join so we can have a full house before we get, deep in the conversation. Also want to let you know, as long as it's okay with you, we're going to record this and put it up on YouTube tonight. We did that yesterday with our session. It was very, very popular. I think we had maybe 10,000 views or so in the first 18 hours. So we'll do this the same way. We'll do an intro and put this up as its own video on YouTube and let people kind of, take that in on that channel, if you don't mind, Dan.
No, not at all. In fact, are you going to, if there are any questions or comments, are you going to feed them our way or put our contact information up there as part of that as well?
Oh yeah, as far as your contact information, that is a good point. I can put your speaker profile up on the page.
That'd be great.
Okay, we'll do that. And then it doesn't have your email, but what I'll do is I'll publish it. So everybody
That's fine. My website has a contact form as well. If you just want to put the website up, that'll work too.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we have you in exhibitors. You and Aether as well. Let me get you guys loaded up. And certainly,
wow, time has really flown. I have no concept of elapsed time at all, and I've been emailing but not like actually looking at the time on my phone, and then I just realized it's literally almost 11 o'clock, and
I know, didn't that come up pretty fast today?
It sure did.
I felt like today's
hang out with you guys for hours and not even know.
I felt like today's gone a lot faster than yesterday did. Maybe it was because it's the first day.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and also time has been like an accordion lately. I mean, it's just some weeks are minutes and some days are months, and it's just I don't know that we have a good if we didn't have clocks or the sun, I don't know that we would know what was going on right now. Like it's just
and calendars, what day of the week?
I barely have that in my life. Like I live by a calendar where people schedule stuff, and I'm surprised every day to see what my schedule is. And sometimes I'm surprised that it's Thursday or whatever the case may be. So.
Well, I think the shutdowns with people living at home and stuff, it's kind of interrupted our normal life pattern. Like we're used to going to work, and then you're like, okay, it's hump day. It's Wednesday. I've got 2 more days left. And now you're home all the time. So it's like, is it Saturday? Is it Tuesday?
Yeah.
It's all the same.
True.
Actually, I think that's one of the things I love about living in Colorado. The traditional work week is far less of a given here. So like, people have more non-traditional schedules, even if they have maybe traditional careers, because people schedule their lives around their outdoor activities, maybe more so than in general. So, my brother who has been in Manhattan for years, he would be out here visiting me, and it would be 3 o'clock on a Tuesday, and we'd be out, and there would be just tons of people out, and he'd be like, well, don't people have jobs? And I'm like, yeah, but we just don't have normal schedules / normal lives. And I think even more so throughout the shutdown, we lost it. We just don't even know.
It's going to become a relic of the past.
Yeah. I can be outside or it's cold.
Something we tell our children about, but I feel like we're in a new phase.
Lost time.
Silicon Valley is just the opposite. We have good weather like 8-9 months of the year. So a lot of the trials and concepts are developed, prototypes are developed without even considering the fact that other areas of the country will have rain in the summer, or freezing temperatures, and a lot of oopsies have been because that's just not a factor at all here, and that's one of the reasons people work all the time, because they can't differentiate. Is it winter? Is it summer? Is it it's just crazy.
That's cool. We're all living through the filter of ourselves, our environment, the people around us, and how they do stuff. Like here, I used to be, I think I mentioned earlier, but I don't think you were on here yet, but in the early days of marijuana legalization in Colorado, I was part of one of the first dispensaries in Boulder, and we had a lot of hot tub meetings, and that just seemed so outside of my paradigm of other things I had done in business so far. But that just, we set up our own thing, and so that became the norm, which was bizarre, and that only lasted for about 1.5 years, because the business you do in hot tubs is like, you need lawyers later. It's a nice idea. Just talking about how the people around you actually really influence how things get done. And now that we're doing things more remotely, and maybe we're connecting with people that are outside of our physical geographic location, I think we're maybe more aware of how much of a bubble we used to be in. Because like, if I recommended a hot tub meeting to some like visiting person from Minnesota, I don't know if they would like think I was crazy, or like hitting on them, or like what. But it was like, that just used to be a thing. But we grew out of it, apparently.
They had a TV show called Marin that was big out here in the 70s, and that failed too.
Cool. I might have to check that out.
So we have another guest that's joined us, Greg James. How are you doing today, sir?
Yeah. I'm doing really well. We're a little north of California, so we're in Vancouver here. So
yeah,
we get a little bit of rain sprinkled with our sun in the summer, and then we get nothing but basically rain in the winter. So you need to check your products to see if they're good for the water. We're all right for that.
I were watching a show last night on the History Channel called Alone. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but it's where they drop people, survivalists, they drop them onto these remote places in the world, and they're allowed to bring 10 things, and then they have to survive, and whoever survives the longest is the winner, and I guess they win a prize. I think this year it's like $1 million or something. But when the series first started, we went back to watch the first season, and it's on Vancouver Island, which is that right outside of Vancouver?
Yeah. It's just across a short spread of the ocean. Wow. Probably like 20 miles or something like that.
Well, I don't know if there are any places that people can go to on the island that are tourist friendly, but the places they dropped them off in, it seemed extremely just not developed and kind of scary where they're dropping them off. I mean, it's kind of like man against predator sort of thing. Is it, have they developed the island at all, or is it just?
Oh yeah, no, the island's actually quite developed. They would have had to work fairly hard to find that location.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there's actually a really neat, and it's actually a semi-famous trail called the West Coast Trail, and it's on the west coast of Vancouver Island, and it's a pretty good rugged hike. But it's a lot of it was based off of in the 1800s and earlier. There's ships would get wrecked in that area, and but very very beautiful big old growth forest trees and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
There's actually not very many predators on Vancouver Island, just because they'd have to swim to get over there. So it's kind of strange that you talked about all the predators on the island.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and look at it, but there were bears and wolves and stuff, and they were just, it was like a big rainforest. They were in the middle of it. It didn't look hospitable. But I've been to Vancouver a couple of times. It's very nice.
I love Vancouver. I've been there twice now because of metals. So that's another thing I love, is I get to go to Vancouver. But the palm trees were the things that surprised me the most. I just didn't expect to see palm trees in Canada, considering the only other place I've been was Toronto. So
Coast makes a big difference. It
sure
makes
does.
the temperate. Yeah.
And actually it's actually interesting too, is that there's actually just off of Vancouver on our little Gulf Islands, there's Lots of actually fresh fruit were grown in there during the 1800s, and that would kind of supplied Vancouver in the early stages, because in between us and Vancouver Island is actually this really kind of weird temperate zone in the climate, where it gets really really warm even through the winter. It doesn't get as rain as everywhere else.
Interesting. All right, well, I think we're at the top of the hour, so I'm gonna go ahead and do a quick intro since we're recording. We can go ahead and get started if you guys are ready, Ann and Greg.
Yep.
All right, here we go. Thank you, everyone. You have joined the North American Monetary Metal Summit. This is the day 2 Q&A for August 7th at 12 p.m. CST. And we're joined by 2 very special guests, Ann Bridges, Silicon Valley author, and Greg James, Chief Operations Officer for Aether Catalyst. The focus of today's meeting is going to be looking at resource dependencies in the U.S. and potential solutions for some of those in the platinum group metals through Greg's company. How are you guys doing today?
Thank you.
So thank you so much for joining the conference. Appreciate you having you guys on here. And the reason I wanted to bring you on is because I've been learning from Ann and doing some of my own research into resource dependency with the United States and our allies versus some of our trading partners. And it's become really an interest of study for me. And I know that you worked a lot on resource dependency and written books and done research. Can you kind of walk us through a little bit of your background in getting into this subject?
Whoa. Okay. So I had a background in Silicon Valley, high tech, communications, computers, content when it all came together in the 90s, when the internet really exploded, and had kind of kept my eye on a lot of these emerging technologies. And when the China did the embargo in 2010 on Japan for rare earths, I waited for the outcry that, oh my God, we have to do something. And there was nothing. So 3 years later, I said, well, I'm going to write a book about this because no one will talk about it. And I had chosen novels as my way to communicate complex information to a more generic and general audience. So I wrote a novel, Rare Metal, which shows Silicon Valley's response to a comparable embargo, kind of where the areas are where we had some vulnerabilities, the link to China, a lot of the same geopolitical issues we're facing today, Uyghur Muslim concentration camps, and just the whole Great Firewall. These are perpetuating themes apparently for the last 10 years. And that led me into being approached by Dr. Nin Bamula, who's a geologist, to collaborate with him on writing a book called Groundbreaking, about America's mineral dependence on other countries around the world. So that kind of launched my understanding of the issue beyond to Silicon Valley, and really woke me up to a very, very complex issue that there aren't simple answers for. Many people are working bits and pieces of it, but there's very little collaborative or strategic effort to really find solutions.
So, Ann, what do you think are the major risks of us not having resource independence, or at least trading partners that we can rely on for some of our critical resources like rare earths, platinum group metals, cobalt, and things like that?
Well, I often find that the best way to communicate these issues is to look for models. And I think if you look at our oil and gas dependency on OPEC, that started, and the threats of embargoes and the realities of those embargoes in the 70s, and how long it has taken us to become energy independent. So 40 years later, we have some ingenious technologies. Fracking started really being able to tap into our own natural wealth and really create a boom for the economy and for our ability to stand up to the geopolitical pressures of being reliant on other countries. I think many people would point to our reliance on the Middle East for our entanglements there, because if we didn't have the oil being exported in our friendly relations, we would be in a world of hurt. Our industry would be in a world of hurt. So if we can maintain independence with using our own resources, it puts us in a more powerful position of being able to negotiate from a point of strength, not get into wars and choose sides on some of these issues, because we are our own independent nation. So that then allows us to create treaties and go forward with allied countries who have similar strategic goals as our country. So when you get into mineral resources, we have quite a few under our own feet. We also have strong allies now with Canada and Mexico with the USMCA. Clearly, we have historical ties with the UK and Australia and Japan, who all are expressing concerns that our mineral processing and purification and ultimately manufacturing is mostly running through China, and that has become a real problem.
Yeah. I know the industry often looks for ways to kind of solve some of these problems. So I wanted to turn to you, Greg. I know that we also have some challenges with getting the platinum group metals. A lot of those metals are used in catalytic conversions, such as for the automotive sector, because of the unique properties. Platinum, palladium, however, are not very abundant in the Earth's crust. And the two main countries that we source ours from are South Africa and Russia. And for different reasons has led to some either geopolitical or just supply chain risk in getting those metals to us. You guys are working on a potential solution for that. Can you walk us through what you're doing there at Aether Catalyst?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point about that, and you know, it's interesting even just to go to see what length of work the OEMs go through to actually guarantee themselves that the catalyst material. So they're hedging, they're buying. Actually, in the industry, as we understand it, is that the OEMs will actually buy the catalyst and then send it to be processed and then bring it into the bricks that they put in the catalytic converter. So on that level, they're very, very understanding and you know, a little nervous about that whole situation. You know, what's one of the things for us is our company. What we did is we basically took a look at, you know, the PGMs and took a look at, you know, what other potential solutions we could apply to that would be non-PGMs. And so that's what our focus has been, is to replace those PGMs with the non-PGMs. And it's good for, you know, in Canada and the US, just as Anne was saying, is that it opens up the market to a whole bunch of other different suppliers that are more in North America, more easily accessible. So that's been our focus. We've been really focused in the last 4 or 5 years. You know, the thing with PGMs, as was pointed out, they're very good at the chemical reactions that are needed. So for us, that's been our focus, is to get the activity of the non-PGMs up, and then to be able to maintain that over the lifetime of the catalyst. It's a very, very structured, very regulated industry that we're trying to enter into, and you know, the end of life requirements are pretty tenuous. They're difficult, and so really it's all about, for the non-PGM, is getting the activity up and maintaining that activity over the life of the product.
So the idea for solving this problem, did it come from a regulatory need, like it was at a government request, or was it more of just a scientific curiosity, or what really gave you the idea to try to tackle this problem?
I think you know, one of the really big driving is economically, is that, you know, in my experience of, you know, I've been doing development of new products for, you know, 25 years, and you need to have a pretty big, pretty good value proposition. And that's the one thing when we're talking about a material that's in the thousands of dollars per ounce kind of range, and we can replace it with the tens of dollars per pound range. There's a very compelling a value proposition there. So if you do execute and you do meet the requirements, then there's a guaranteed large pull to a very big industry. And so we like that value proposition, and the return that we can get when we have success.
Yeah, and I know when talking about rare earths, the value proposition may be a little bit different because China is so dominant there in terms of the companies and the mines around the world that they've acquired, but also their processing capacity. Do you think that there's a similar economic incentive for us to compete against them in rare earths, or are we going to have to come at those metals from a different angle?
Probably both. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Anne. So.
So my take, and I'd love to hear yours, is there are two answers to that. One is one of the reasons that China is so dominant is because they do the iron ore mining, and they are just the volume that they are able to create as a byproduct of that mining is what allows them to have enough volume to be able to then process and purify it effectively. So if we look at other things besides iron, in this country, for example, Minnesota, iron ore mines have been halted for ages. We have copper as a byproduct, rare earths are found in copper mines. So we need lots of copper in order to justify, electric vehicles and electrification of the grid and all the electric issues that we want to support going forward. So you could argue that, okay, let's cost justify mining copper, but let's look at how we can also extract rare earths as part of that process. So that's one way to cost justify them. The other is very candidly to deal with the economic platform and say maybe there's another solution. So one example that's being put forward through the legislative process is to create a co-op, the same way that dairy and the corn for fuel, a hybrid corn that was grown, that was all done through a co-op, where the people who provided the raw materials, in this case milk or corn, but you could argue the miners, would have a guaranteed contract with the price that they would get for their output, and then the users of that those minerals would have a known cost for that. The problem is it's still a very complex supply chain, so that's only a portion of it, but it is a new way of looking at it domestically.
Okay, going back to you, Greg, for a moment. I know that you're partnering with OEMs in the industry who have technical requirements and also the need for this material, and also with universities. How did those partnerships come about in helping you try to solve this problem with platinum and palladium?
Yeah, so it was, that's one thing is that, we can tie into academia, and that was a good starting point. And then also to, as you're doing your development, it allows you to get some good insight on some very tricky solid state chemistry that's going on. So that's been invaluable. It's also been invaluable in that the university also have a lot of high-end equipment that we can access. And so that's been a very beneficial thing, so that we can start seeing things on a very microscopic level that helps us understand what we're making and how it's changing over our life. As on the OEM front, that was one of the things that we did early on, is we reached out to a number of OEMs. We kind of limited the amount because we just wanted to get the initial feedback. In that initial feedback, it was great. We found that there was pull for the technology, so they were all interested. So when we approach OEMs, we find that they're always interested in where this non-PGM technology is, and they're looking for a breakthrough in that area. So to get in with the OEMs, it was actually quite easy. We just worked our way in and found people that were generally interested. And then once we were there, they were saying, let's test the sample, let's see where you're at. Here's some feedback on what you need to improve, and then we've kept that cycle going. So that, again, it confirms that there's a real pull from the industry to try to change this dynamics that's happening. One of the things that I will say in the presentation a little later on is that the catalytic converter actually is now becoming one of the more expensive components in the car. Because with, when we saw the run up of palladium, you're starting to look at a lot of cost in the precious metals that are sitting in your catalytic converter. Even to the point where the theft is actually becoming something that we hear more and more about, where people are taking a zip saw and cutting off the catalytic converter in 2 minutes and running with it. So I think there's just a general awareness that we need to have some other solution to try to get the supply back into a point where we're not relying on the PGMs. And if the catalytic converter market is so large, if we can get the catalyst meeting requirements, we can take that need away, which will really take the pressure off the prices in those PGMs for some of those more other applications that are out there.
Yeah. So, Ann, I think a lot of what Greg's company does is trying to solve a problem with technology. And I know when you and I spoke about independence and also efficiency in mining, we talked about the technology aspect. Can you speak to some of the technological advancements we're seeing as possible solutions in being more efficient in our mineral independence and obtaining the minerals that we need every day? Is there a lot of technology out there that's helping us?
Sure. There's probably tons that I don't know of. Just some examples I'll give you. Recently, they've come up with new ways from GPS and satellites and sound to be able to more target where there might be deposits and to actually identify the grade of the deposit before they start digging. So that's a huge cost efficiency in terms of exploration. And then you get all the way to the processing and purification, where nanotechnology was actually developed. You talked about universities. Universities are funding science in other industries and for other applications, but once you get down to core science, sometimes those applications can move over to the mining industry. So using nanotechnology actually has been proven to be able to purify substance. So whether it's blood plasma or polluted water or mine tailings, you run it through some, proprietary nano beads, and all of a sudden you end up with a highly purified output at the elemental level. So the question is whether that can scale. The question is, how do you apply that now to industry? That's great, but the concepts have been proven, and now it's a matter of investment and figuring out again how they get into the entire supply chain, as just opposed to being a wonderful aha patentable moment. I think you have to actually commercialize it, talk to the manufacturers who may have a need for it. And again, as in the mining industry, domestically, you're really talking about a phoenix rising from the ashes, and so there just aren't a lot of players, and the profit margin is still thin for them to be able to really take risks.
Yeah, and just another thing I'd like to add on to what Anna's saying too is that the actual miners are conservative people and conservative companies by nature. So when they're trying to look to adopt some really high-tech technology, it takes them a while to wrap their head around that, and they need some incentive. I think they need some help to be able to adopt that, to take away that risk profile, because again, in the mining industry, it's a very mature industry, and it's a very conservative industry. So they're not used to jumping out on the end of the diving board, if you will, and pulling new technology in. And I think that's one of the issues that you have to overcome.
Yeah, the alter ego of that is, of course, are the people who will chase any new idea, right? The concept of fool's gold, that there are people with money to waste and will invest foolishly. And so the people who manage to survive in the industry tend to be the more conservative ones, because they didn't chase something foolish. They stuck to their plan, they stuck to their knitting, they had a return on investment for their original investors. And I hope that the gold and silver price increases will actually help to fund some additional growth in the industry, that there's a window of opportunity here, because it's cyclical, it will go down again at some point, but a window of opportunity to say, okay, finally there may be enough profit in the system to be able to do some more reinvestment.
Yeah, and what we see in one of the sessions we have of mining finance is coming up later today. Kai Hoffman owns Orninc, tracks Canadian investment into the resources through a company called Orninc, which is part of his Sword Financial Group. And we're noticing whenever the pattern is that when gold and silver do well, money comes into resources. So it tends to boost up the whole resource sector. So hopefully we're hoping that there'll be more investment in some of these companies that are able to provide key resources for us, not only the gold and silvers of the world, but other resources that we may need. And then hopefully we can balance that with technology to make it more efficient, and maybe with some replacements as well. One of the general themes of this conference from a gold bug or silver bug perspective, and has to do with messaging. And the traditional view of gold and silver as money, I think, is not the view now. And I think messaging is something that you write a lot about, and how we interpret messages and how messages are put out. For people here who I think sometimes have gone through extraordinary lengths to reach the point they are at now with the resources, how do we fight through some of this messaging, and where does this messaging come from that resources are bad or not things that we really need, or are not viable industries, and why people are going elsewhere?
Well, I think there has been a very successful campaign for at least 50 years since Earth Day first launched, at a minimum, where the environmental movement captured a lot of funding and grabbed hold of the message of media that we need to do something to protect the planet. And then more and more money just kept on going through these environmental NGOs, to the point where there's a political element to it as well, of shaping the message to achieve certain goals beyond just the health of the planet, let's put it that way. So that being said, I think that what you've got is, at least in this country, where mining is such a small percentage of our economy, and such a small percentage of, I doubt any miners donate to lobbyists or hire lobbyists or donate to political campaigns, or very few of them, while you have people who make money in Silicon Valley, for example, who want everyone to be virtual. They don't want people commuting. And so you've got this real push-pull of political agendas that is now being fought through the media. And just a real basic problem, as an example, is the media, the print media and the online media uses something called Getty Images for photos. I don't know if you ever try to do photo stock or search for an image, but there's basically one major place called Getty Images. And if you go on there and you say, I just want to see if there is a photo of a reclaimed mining site in America, they have 0 photos. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't reclaimed mines. It means that the companies who have successfully reclaimed mines and created parks or whatever have not submitted their photographs to be used publicly. And so if you're a photo editor and you're going to put a picture along with a story about mining, you're going to go to Getty Images and there is nothing there. So in some respects, the mining industry has shot itself in the foot by distrusting the messages of media, and the miners who have been fighting with lawyers against environmentalists, their response has been to hole up and just do their job, which is fine and totally understandable. But the reality of media today is there needs to be huge outreach to the media players, and to get yourself interviewed and to get yourself in front of the influencers in terms of getting your message across with video, with photography in a sustainable way. And that is an output of a thriving industry. We have not had a thriving industry, so we're starting from square one on that one as well.
So Greg, I know that you guys are now making, as you closer, Gen 4 and further on in your product, it gets closer to maybe a usable product. You've started to put yourself out there. What's been the reception for your company in developing this technology? Have you received any pushback from, say, the mining industry or anybody in government, or have you largely been welcomed for the problems that you're trying to solve?
Yeah, for the people that we've talked to, OEMs and even some of the politicians and stuff, again, there's always interest for it. So there's been really no pushback for that technology at all. There's always the question that comes up, which is, well, we will be all with electric vehicles in the next, 4 or 5 years, and really that is not something that we see that's going to be in the near term. Electric cars, there is a shift, there is some uptake, but it's still a very low percentage of the vehicles out there. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done on the infrastructure. If you put that much power, if you take a look at how much power is generated by internal combustion engines around the world, and if you wanted to put that on the grid, that's going to be a very difficult thing, and you're going to need to upgrade your grid. So it's going to take time. And so that's how we answer the question. And most people, when we explain that, yeah, electric cars will probably end up coming at some point. It's just not going to be immediate. It's not going to be in the near term, just because there's so much stuff that has to go on inside that. So once we explain that, people, they kind of stop, think a little bit, and then they go, yeah, that makes sense, for that's probably the biggest thing that we hear as a feedback is, what about the electric vehicle movement, and why it's real. It's just a lot slower than what people, I think, are hoping it will be.
Yeah. Greg, I know in our interview for the conference here, you spoke about other applications for your technology. Can you enlighten some of the people here who may be interested in investing in your company, what those could be?
Yeah, it's one of the things. We talk a lot about the automobile because that's the big market. That's the $16 billion of PGMs that we can replace. But interestingly, there's small motors out there right now, and those small motors typically in North America don't have any catalytic converters on it. They basically meet emission requirements by just tuning their engine at the factory, and then basically taking away any way to modify the engine. Right now, from what we've been reading and researching, we see 5% of urban population or pollution comes from those small motors. And so there's a really interesting market for us where, we can go in there and we can address that 5% with our technology. We do have seen some stuff from feedback of one OEM that talks about maybe some legislation coming in 3 to 4 years that might require some catalytic converters on these small motors. So we feel we're positioned pretty good right now to take our technology. The small motors is not as harsh a requirement as a car. The car is, we're looking at probably 12 to 14,000 hours versus 1,000 hours for the small motors. Your lawn mowers and backup gen sets and leaf blowers. And beyond that, I think the other area, that probably after we kind of get into the market and we see what else is out there is volatile organic compounds, the VOCs. That'll be another area where industry's trying to clean that up from an environmental regulation kind of point of view, and we could have a cheaper solution for that as well. So, and anything in between that, so like motorcycles, scooters, small motors, cars, trucks.
Okay, interesting. And back to you in terms of legislation. I know that we're trying to develop technology substitutes, but we still have to rely on our resources. Certainly, Greg's product will require base metals, so we still have to mine. We're just mining a different metal. We're mining base metals versus the platinum group metals. So we still have to have an environment that's conducive to us being able to obtain these. From a regulatory perspective, do you see major roadblocks to the U.S. redeveloping its mining industry, or can you speak to that?
The roadblocks, I think, are frankly politics, and we won't get into that. But the reality is legislation doesn't get passed unless you can get both the House and the Senate to agree and the president to sign legislation. Okay, so where we are right now is the executive office. President Trump has done a lot of executive orders to try to move this forward. I think we've gotten some major progress on a number of fronts. One, he has lifted some of the, freed some of the lands, the federal lands, to allow mining again. It's a small percentage, but it's a key percentage. They have also made major changes in the regulatory oversight. NEPA, which is the, I don't even remember what it is. NEPA is the precursor to the Environmental Protection Agency. And back when the EPA was formed, there was actually a law that was passed and then repassed and signed by both President Carter and President Reagan, requiring the environmental issues to be balanced with the interests of industry. And that law kind of got forgotten and shoved aside, but it still is on the book. And I think you're seeing people recognize that we do have the tools that already exist to start pushing forward on making this happen. The problem is the will and the investment and still the legal issues. Even though the law might be there, if it hasn't been challenged yet in court all the way up to the Supreme Court, then you may end up in a huge battle over these issues. But Pebble Mine, for example, in Alaska is moving forward finally after, I think, 20 years of going through the regulatory process. So what you may see is as more and more of these long-term projects start actually happening and they're be successful and any legal challenges have been overrun, then you may see some more companies go ahead and move forward saying, okay, it's safe for us to put our toes back in the water. And there's some very creative solutions. There's a company down in Texas Rare Element Resources, who use state land. And federal laws don't apply, so they are all under the aegis of the state of Texas, which is mining friendly. And so through that process, they're able to make progress on creating a whole rare earth supply chain.
Yep. One of the things I talked about in my presentation, No Resources, No Economy, was not only how resources are vitally important to everything we do just on a daily basis, but also what I see as a geopolitical realignment going on based on trade routes and based upon the movement and access to resources. And certainly on one side, you have China doing this massive Belt and Road Initiative with Russia and Europe and a lot of the BRIC nations. And then you see the US, Japan, Australia, and some other countries aligning. It seems as though resources are so important that we're making new treaties and we're realigning our allies on that. Do you feel as though, from our ally perspective, do we have the right allies in place to help us with resource independence, or are we going to have to fight this ourselves, or what else do we need to do there?
I think you can always create new allies. If you look at the continents, the two major continents you didn't mention are South America and Africa, which are hugely mineral resource funded, and there is battles over there. China has created a position in many African countries through the One Belt One Road initiative, and the question is whether or not they are going to be able to continue what is still exploitative labor, child labor, etc. There is a great book called The Elements of Power, written by David Abraham, and it's about the fact we are entering the rare metal age. The same way we had an iron age and a bronze age, we are now entering the rare metal age, and the shape of our world over the next 100, 200 years is indeed going to be based on mineral resources, its access, its importance. If you want to fight a war, if we go to a war, you need to have access to the minerals that are going to be able to support your military. And as that's becoming more technology based, then those obscure little metals are going to be very, very important to you. I don't see how it will play out. I think that there is a heightened awareness to it that didn't exist 5 years ago, which is good. But that just may mean we're going to have more conflicts than we had 5 years ago too.
So, Anne, I think we've covered a lot of your research, but before we turn it over to questions, any last thoughts on your work and things that we haven't talked about that you think are important for people here at the conference to maybe dig into a little bit?
No, I think we've covered quite a bit between the interview from before and this. I think we got a good basis covered. You can contact me if anyone has any questions. Yeah.
We'll do that. Greg, I know the value proposition of your company and what you're producing, I think, is huge for investors here. Is there any additional points that you would like to provide to the attendees?
Yeah, I think it's like, for us, it's an exciting time because, we've done a lot of stuff to stabilize our technology, and we're now getting down to those last mile problems, typically like vehicle dynamics, and how it operates, and being able to tune our catalyst inside there. So it's a very, very exciting time for the company. And, even looking at the small motor market, which is untouched, maybe doesn't have the same value proposition, but it's a need. Again, 5% of the urban pollution is from this source. So if it's not regulated now, which it isn't to that extent where it needs catalytic converters, it's going to come in the next little while. So yeah, it's and I do like the idea of, when I take a look at palladium and those run up because we're having a supply shortage, we need to do something to address that, because we're using more than we're mining. So
That's right.
I think it's a good spot for us to be in.
Yeah, and I think rhodium's there too. I think it was $8,000 or $9,000 an ounce at one point, and I know a lot of catalytic conversions use that as well. Yeah. We did have a question for you, Greg, from the chat from Rakesh. He says, which metals are you using as an alternative to PGM, and around when will your technology, how long do you think it'll be before your technology can be adopted by the automotive companies?
Yeah, so we we won't name the exact composition, but we do center on base metal catalysts. So we're in the very economical one. So like I said, it's in the tens of dollars of pounds, not the thousands of dollars of an ounce kind of world. So far, we've been also focusing on staying away from rare earth metals. So we've been able to stay inside that family of base metals, which is really good. So where we're at with the technology is we just finished our Gen 4 technology. We showed that around to some OEMs, got some very focused feedback on what they would like to see tweaked, and so that's what we're in right now, is what we're doing the next generation of that. We've been typically pretty quick in turning our technology around when we see these problems. We've gone through a lot of major problems. We've seemed to knock off one a year. So that's where we are, is we're focused on that, and we'll probably start focusing a little bit on the small motor market, because we think that might be a nearer term. With the OEMs, we're definitely going to get back out there, get in the circle, get our new technology as it's being developed in front of them. I think, from the pull is so good. So if we can meet the requirements, the pull is going to be very quick from the OEMs, but it's still going to take time to scale. It's still going to take time to do the validation and do the proper, emission requirement verification. So it'll be you know, they'll happen pretty quick, but again, when you're going into such a large market, it never happens as quick as you would like.
Yeah. Okay, I'll go ahead and open it up to any attendees here who may have questions. I know people are often shy, so if you want to type it into the chat, that's fine. But any questions, please feel free to unmute and ask for our guests, Ann and Greg.
Well, just in case someone's typing, one thing that did occur to me, we didn't talk about it all, but it's the, you know, we're so involved in the COVID issues that we forgot that has been a major driver for addressing supply chain, and medical equipment, medical devices do require these same minerals and metals. And if you're looking for where there might be some unification and commonality of interest, not just in this country, but with allies and around the world, has been to try to make sure that we aren't caught quite so flat-footed next time in terms of just having supplies and manufacturing. I think there was a belief that, you know, there would never be a problem again that couldn't be handled through software or Zoom, whatever. And we're finding that, oh no, there are realities of life and there's a physicality to life that metals and minerals have to address somehow.
Yeah, it's a good thing to point out is we couldn't have this phone call right now without energy, obviously, and also gold and feldspar and zinc and clay and all that stuff that goes into making up our computers. So, you know, resources are very important to all of us, and just being able to communicate, and especially in this world in which we're not, you know, commuting to the office.
One of the things I just added, though, sorry, Dave. One of the things I would just add in there, though, is that sometimes I think the general population forgets where all this stuff comes from. It's that old story where I go buy a steak from the Safeway, and you know, some of the kids don't realize that it actually comes from a cow. You know, and I think it's the same with mining. Is that I think people forget that all this stuff we're a very consumer driven kind of community. And, you know, to do that, you need to have stuff to make it with. And whether it's the oil and gas for plastics, or whether it's the mining for the, you know, the phones, the cars, everything, I just get a sense at times that the general public doesn't realize how big an impact and how big a need mining is. And I don't know how that message gets out there, but I think it's lacking.
Yeah, I agree. Go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, so I have a question. And Greg, in terms of being an investor and the cycle of your company, I'm thinking in terms of value, and you know, as an investor, I want to catch the wave before it's reached a high value. Can you address the stock value relative to its potential in the future?
Yeah, I think for sure, when you take a look at our company, you know, we did go public a year ago. We are looking to raise money in a financing round. I think to me, this is an interesting time, because as I've said in the past, these things tend to, like, you work hard, and then boom, you get a thing that just changes and it goes really quick. And I think that's where we're at right now, is that we've on our 4th generation technology, we've seen that we have a few little holes, and now we're just executing on those holes. And so I think it's one of those things where it can happen real quick, and and it will happen quick. So once we get out there, we get validation from the OEMs from that level. Things were going to go, I think our stock price is going to go up quite a bit, because again, the value proposition is so high, and I think there's going to be a big pull to push it into the market fairly fast. So again, that's the nature of where we're at. You know, I think we're on the last mile problems, and we solve that, and then things will move really quick.
So how close are you to going into production?
So the next stage for us is going to be you know, getting that final validation of our technology from the car guys. So inside the industry, the car guys are the ones that have the biggest desire for this change, for this disruptive change, because they'll take a catalyst that they're paying $500 for, and they'll be changing it out to $50. So they're the ones that we want to get to. They're the ones that, you know, once we meet their internal standard, then that's where they're going to pull from. So that's their next stage of our development, is going to be basically getting that technology verification checkmark from the OEM, and then from there, then I think everything kind of lays out. And it like I said before, it's going to take a little bit of time to scale up the technology, even though we've done work to make sure that we don't have any super fancy processes. They're more or less standard processes. So the scale up to volume, both in size and the number of units will have to happen after that and to get verified. But like I said, I think once that validation by the OEMs is done, things will happen very quickly.
You have the proprietary patents and on the process and.
Good question.
So yeah, so a lot of the stuff that, some of the stuff on the processing side, that's a better in a lot of ways to make that your trademark or your own proprietary sense, not to document that. We basically are in a spot where we're building our technology portfolio right now. We do have some stuff in some provisional status, but we're evaluating whether it's better to let it lapse and then go with the better technology that we're developing right now. So with what's going on right now is we think in this next technology cycle, the problem that we're solving, that we see that we're solving, is going to be very unique. And so then we'll wrap our IP protection around this newer technology we're developing right now.
And have you patented that?
No, no. We still need to do a little bit more on development on that side to be able to have a good fulsome protection.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question from Syed in London. It's kind of a three-parter for you, Ann, so I'll ask them one at a time. First part of it is, how will the free market be able to encourage end users to source rare metals from North America without government intervention, such as tariffs being applied to imports?
That's a good question. That's kind of the holy grail. The consumer, if you talk about the real end user, let's say someone who uses an iPhone, the consumer has started looking at wanting to get maximum value for their dollar. It makes sense. That's what a marketplace does. So to the point that the costs of the minerals and the metals have been subsidized by China's government driving the costs lower, or by slave labor, for example, with cobalt. The costs have been held low artificially. So how does Apple, for example, go to their customers and say, well, we're going to raise the price of your phone by 10% because it's really going to cost us more if we mine here? A lot of consumers will say, well, never mind, or, no, I want it for the price I want, especially the younger generation, which has grown up on free internet, free TV, free whatever, free parents, depending how far you want to expand it. So it's a real tough issue. I think that they're trying to say, buy American. You could argue if you have quality, and the supply chain says, well, you can get cheap quantity, or you can have higher end quality and maybe not replace the product as much. That's a viable argument because you're talking about value as opposed to price. But that value proposition needs to be defined in terms that the end consumer can indeed understand. And the manufacturers themselves have to also have that convincing. In talking about your OEM discussions in the car industry, for example, I'm sure they're happy to hear they can go from $500 to $50, but at what point do they want to push you to $5? Because after all, they want to keep that margin themselves for their own stock price. So it's a real challenge when you have the big elephant in the room of China, who the government is subsidizing this core mineral output, and they have a political agenda to dominate in this space and continue dominating in this space. So it's going to have to take a coalition, I think, of a private-public partnership to say we're all on the same page in order to get a similar result.
So I'll put the second and third parts of that question together. Say it's also asking, if we were to restart rare earth mining here, would there be a delay in the new mines to come on stream? Who would pay for the capex for that? And would it increase basically prices down the supply chain for us to do it, at least temporarily?
Yeah, yes, it will take time. Mining always takes time. This is not Silicon Valley where you can pop a product out in 3 to 6 months. The closest that has Actual production is Mountain Pass. They're going public, I think, later this year, but they have just the light rare earths. Those are not the heavy rare earths, which are the key ones. The neodymium, for example, for batteries and magnets are in the heavy rare earth category. So I think it will take still many years. Now, that said, when we went to war in World War II, for example, and there was a huge focus to industrialize and mine stibnite out of Idaho because we needed it for bullets. That happened very quickly, but that was that kind of crisis to make that happen. The closest we see is what's going on with the PPE equipment and the realization that we need to have at least some sort of national security protection to protect the health of our citizens. So that may push regulations aside. It may create some certainty for investors to go ahead and put some money in. The other element that you can consider is what are the alternative investments that are attractive to the investors themselves, because with interest rates being as low as they are, ones that want long-term investment horizons, for example, or want to invest in something beyond just software and the internet, they want to invest in real assets or tangible assets, then they may be more attracted to invest in something that has been shunned for years, but will actually have a tangible output, and they have a longer-term horizon.
So Greg, follow-up question for you. That's interesting points that Ann made. When you guys go to market, are you just going to license your technology? Do you plan on becoming the manufacturer, or how is that going to work for your company?
So right now, our target is that we will want to have a non-exclusive licensing arrangement with someone that's probably doing the coating of the catalyst onto the ceramic brick.
Okay.
One of the things that we decided as a company early on is that we need to move fast. This is about the speed of getting things to market. We see we have a window and we need to get to that window in a short time. So by trying to become a tier 1 or I guess a tier 2, tier 3 automotive supplier, that's an enormous amount of work, and it does take a lot of time. So our approach is going to be to get licensing the technology, pull a royalty from that, and reinvest that money into the technology.
Okay.
And also trying to look at using that money and their technology at other applications where then they might be lower volume, where we can start becoming, a small or a manufacturer in this sector.
Okay. I think John H. said he had a question. John, do you want to ask it?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you speak up a little, please?
Yeah. Okay. Let me make sure this is turned up. So I joined halfway through this Q&A, but are you talking about platinum? I'm hearing catalysts.
Yes.
Or what metal are you talking about?
So in the catalytic converters, the big three is the biggest one by percentage is palladium right now. And actually that's a shift that used to be platinum in 2010 and earlier, and then there's been a shift to palladium over the time. There is a little bit of focus inside the industry to try to see how we can get platinum to take away some of the burden of palladium. And then the third component, it's a fairly small percentage, but it's very expensive, is the rhodium. So those are the big three: platinum, palladium, and rhodium.
Okay, and then the second part to my question, you're kind of talking about it, but for me as, a retail investor, I'm looking at scarcity. Like what might be a metal that, like rhodium I know is very, very scarce, and platinum as well. But, what would be a metal that's somewhat undervalued and certain miners or industry would benefit from a rise back to a fair price?
I think, Ann, maybe that would be the rare earths. I don't know. Are we competitive in that space?
There are a lot of them. The problem I see, if you have too much scarcity, especially in a technology-based world, engineers figure out a way to engineer around it. And so there's this balancing that has to come forward. And that's why the concept of supply chain and some sort of holistic approach needs to be looked at, because if there's too much scarcity, it will be lost. If there's too little scarcity and the price goes up, I mean, you know, you have to balance in the price, and you have to balance in what other players there might be in other countries, and then you start throwing in, you know, currency wars as well, and my brain starts frazzling. So it is an interesting question. I would say one of the more interesting opportunities I have seen is this concept of these co-products, that if you invest in copper, then if they can extract rare earths, and there's 17 of them, if one of those rare earths becomes used, you know, Elon Musk decides he wants to use it for SpaceX, whatever, then all of a sudden you're in the right place. Nickel, for example, a co-product is cobalt. But I've heard now that they're talking about getting rid of cobalt in electric vehicles and batteries because it's become too much of a problem. So if you're an investor, you're going to have to take some bets, you're going to have to take some risks, and cross your fingers that you bet right and get a big reward.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I like about silver, because it is, you know, there is a pretty good supply, and it is an heavy industrial use. So, okay, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I think Jeff Jung had a question. Jeff, do you want to ask it here?
Yeah. So my question is for either Anne or Greg. I was kind of not wondering from an investor's standpoint, but kind of as in like looking for employment in the sector. Like, what's like the typical manufacturing company that would work with metals that are scarce in some of the products? What do they usually do in terms of like trying to prepare and like procuring those metals like in advance? Like, is there such thing as a position where somebody will like like be a buyer of those metals like in like a large scale production?
Go ahead, you go first, and I'll fill in if there's something else.
Yeah, I think the one example that I have is again, you know, Ford or GM or Honda or any of the big car companies. You know, they're going to have a buyer who's going out there buying their supply that they forecast that they need for the year, and so they're going to do it on hedges. They're going to do it on defining, you know, we want to have this allocation of what comes out of this mine. And so they own that mineral as it comes through the whole process. So I think for sure there's opportunities for buyers of that. You know, that's just on the PGM side. I'm sure for the rare earths, it's the same sort of thing, is that companies will have, you know, somebody responsible for protecting their interests to make sure they don't run out of a material that they use for manufacturing.
Yeah, you're talking about purchasing in broad sectors, and so that's in the finance department. When you're dealing with the large corporations, the public companies in the U.S., they are actually required by law, though the law is kind of not being enforced very much right now, to report as a public corporation their supply chain, where they are sourcing 5 minerals specifically: tin, tantalum, cobalt. I don't remember the other 2. But that concept that there is a supply chain accountability and responsibility of reporting has spawned supply chain companies that actually monitor all this and know not only where the minerals are mined, but every step along the manufacturing supply chain. So, you know, what small vendor may use that to create a component, a tiny component, and then what next level manufacturer uses that component, and then what a manufacturer uses that finished product. And so you've got the entire row of hardware that is being tracked along the way. So if you're interested in the software side of the business, but want to also tap into the hardware, that would be one area you might want to look at. I do know, if you want to just get a sense of what kind of jobs are out there linked to minerals, there are Canadian mining journals that list job openings, and I have just glanced at them to see what's involved and been amazed. I mean, it's a breadth of an industry that is more than just digging stuff out of the ground. They have all the same components that any industry does. It's just their core product is coming out of the ground. Does that help?
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. I don't see any other questions in chat. Any other questions for our 2 guests, Anne or Greg? All right. Looks like we may be, we got one in. I think Rakesh has one. Is there any cooperation possibility with Tesla so the energy metals can flourish faster? Good question.
What do you mean cooperation? I guess I need a clarification here.
Rakesh, do you want to come on and clarify your question? Oh, he's talking about like agreement for like a purchase agreement. So if we can arrange in the industrial sector for demand ahead of time, would that make it easier to secure the supply? I think is what he's asking.
Oh, like when Elon Musk said, I'll give you a long-term contract if you go and mine nickel.
Yeah.
That certainly helps. I've often said that the Department of Defense in the US, if they'd simply do a large purchase order and said, this is what we want to buy over 10 years, and this is the amount of money we're willing to pay for it, that would be enough to attract investors, et cetera. Elon Musk has been a great figure to talk about the need for minerals and metals. I don't know how reliable he is at this point. I personally wouldn't put money into it, but that's me. But I think he's making the point that we need to have a much more strategic policy, if you want to put it that way. China, for example, their policies are done at the national level, and he has said, it's easier to do business in China because they're all in lockstep. Well, the offset of that, of course, is that they don't have the kind of freedoms that we have in the U.S. So pick your poison. Which do you want to do? It's certainly he and Tim Cook from Apple and IBM and GE, any of the car manufacturers. If we could all get on the same page and agree that we need to make this mining happen, I think the transportation industry has a unique position to be able to drive electrical, to drive battery, to drive rare earths, to drive a lot of the economic growth of our country if they would take the lead in that messaging, as opposed to simply competing with Elon Musk.
And I think we're coming to the top of the hour, guys. I wanted to take a moment and share with you the exhibitor area for both of our presenters. And you can go to the exhibitor area on the app or on the webpage, and Anna has a link down here to her website where you can find more information about her books and about information that she's been talking about today. As well as we also have a page for Aether Catalyst. You can find information at their site there. Please, if you wouldn't mind, stop by and give our exhibitors a look. And thank you very much, Anne, for Greg and coming on. We definitely appreciate you providing your insights today and your time.
You're welcome. It's been a joy.
Yes.
Appreciate it very much. I'm going to go ahead and stay online if you guys want to stay online.